Okay, at this point, since there's so many of you out there, and I want to make sure that everyone's questions get answered if you have questions, I'm going to start to open it up to the room, and if there aren't any, I'll continue the discussion, but I'm pretty sure there's going to be some out there, so wave at me if you've got questions. Yeah.
Anyone can answer, but it's an editing-specific question.
Okay, so this one's to the editors at the table?
Yeah.
I forgot to say I'm an editor.
And those that have dealt with editors, and it's really a broad question that way. Do editors always expect short stories, fiction specifically, to be pre-edited? And how would somebody who's just starting afford something like that when editors cost what a low-paying starter market would be paying you?
I'll just go from
Yeah.
So I'm the, as you know, because we know each other, I'm a freelance editor, and so I'm that person you're talking about that would edit something before they send it to someone else, like to Morgue or someone. Especially, I get a lot of new authors coming to me as they get more aware that this is what I do, and I've been doing it for 11 years. And yeah, sometimes I feel bad because my prices are mid-range. I don't charge a huge amount, but I don't charge a little amount because this is my day job and how I earn my living. And sometimes, yeah, I do feel bad that someone may pay me about $200 for a story, and I know they'll only get $50 if they're lucky. And the thing is, though, I consider it, the way I edit, that I'm teaching them. They're going to school. And my hope is that I would only have to edit 1 or 2 stories from a new or young or budding writer, and then they learn. Because a lot of the type of editing I'm doing for them is they're just like new writer mistakes, and so if they can learn this quickly, then they won't make those mistakes again and they'll be fine. So it's my hope that they would learn and just move on. And I think it is, if you come to me, I really try to help you and teach you, and like school and I don't know how the other freelance editors work, so I don't feel that guilty charging more than you're going to make, but because you shouldn't have to come to me that often, you should learn, I hope. But as for the rest of you who are actual acquiring editors, I don't know how that works. If it's worth it for an author to get their work pre-edited.
Well, my situation is a little odd because I wasn't an acquisitions editor. I worked mostly in production and not on fiction. But I will say this: what you should do is get your work as good as you can before you submit it. Usually, if you submit to publication, it's going to go through a copy edit anyway. So you're probably not going to want to, like, I've also worked freelance, so I feel terrible for saying this, but that's probably not the best use of your money. If you're submitting a short story for the first time and it's a cold submission, you might want to get a structural edit because, as you said, it's a learning experience. I would say take it as far as you can, and if you have a team of people, if you know people who are writers who are trying to do the same kind of thing, maybe have them look over it and see if they feel that it could benefit from a professional edit, and kind of approach it that way. But I don't think that you don't have to send it to a publisher. It's amazing if you send it to a publisher ready to go, but I don't think anyone expects that.
I was just going to say, I've never, back when I was doing my small press, I never expected anything to come to me edited. I did expect things to come to me grammar and spell checked, because those are basic functions on Word, and if I'm through your first 3 paragraphs and your sentence structure's all messed up and there's myriad spelling errors and there's also, okay, obviously you haven't even read your work out loud, read it a second, you've sent me a first draft, don't do that. Do what Claire said. Send the cleanest thing that you can possibly send. Maybe have a friend beta read it. But you know what? Most publishers who... Okay, I'm sure there's publishers, and yeah, there are in horror. There are publishers that take things, lay them out, and don't give any editorial. They just basically... There are publishers that do that. Probably not the publisher you want to get involved with.
Yeah.
Most publishers, with their grain of salt, will do a copy edit. If there's a more substantial edit needed, they will also do that. I've been in situations with my press back when I ran it where I did where a book was so clean it really only needed a copy edit. And there were a couple times where I sent notes back to the author and I said, I'm going to be very honest, an extra scene in this part of the book would really strengthen the story, or I think you should remove the prologue entirely because I think you're giving away your twist or whatever. Any publisher that has a good editorial department isn't going to expect a polished print-ready piece they're going to want to do that process in-house because they're preparing that book for, the fans of that imprint and for their customers, and they know who those customers are, and they have their own quality controls for what they expect style-wise, as far as, punctuation, whether you spell out numbers or not. Every publisher has different wants. So whether it's Canadian English or American English, depending on where you're getting published. So if you're starting out, and you haven't gone to creative writing school or journal school or anything, it can be useful to hire an editor just to kind of as a learning mechanism. But I would say if you're polishing your work, and you're proofreading and you're making sure you're running your spell checker and stuff, that's what you need to be doing. You don't need to be dropping a ton of coin before it gets onto
I was going to say, and if you're concerned about the money piece and you just want to get a little better and you need to learn a little bit more from editing, then join a critique group. And there are some that you can find locally. Go to a coffee shop, sniff around, find out who's doing what where. And there's several that are online as well, like Critters and OWW, I think it used to be called. I haven't used that one in a really long time. But there are online critique groups that you can join, and as long as you're critiquing other people's works, they're critiquing yours. And if you're at the very beginning of your career and you just need that little jump up in terms of quality, that's your best bet, because it's free, and you'll learn a lot. And then after that, then you can consider paying an editor.
And if I may jump in, you're going to learn so much critiquing other people's work because you've got a distance from it, and then you're going to have this eureka moment where you go, oh crap, I do that all the time. I'm going to stop doing that. And it's really, the critique groups are fantastic.
Whereas I have the opposite experience. I hate critique groups. No, because I had joined a few early in my career, and they didn't. I was in the people who didn't the horror, or they didn't like the Iran. I don't know. I got really bad advice from people who supposedly knew what they were talking about. I guess that's my mistake from the other question, with listening to those clowns. Yeah, right now I am in a writer's workshop. I'm in a writer's workshop with Gemma Files, Nancy Baker, Michael Rowe, and a couple of other people, and so they're all professional published authors with like 20 books under their belt. So I listen to their advice. But if you're all starting off at the beginning and you're all at the same level, it's really just like party chatter. You want to make sure you get, you're putting all this time. I know about me, I don't have much time in life. And so if you're putting in all this time, getting feedback, putting your work out there for people to critique, make sure you're getting people whose work you admire and respect and who have been in the business for a while, who know what the hell they're talking about, because you can get a lot of really crappy advice from like your peers. And I love my peers, we all love our peers, but you want professional advice. So just be careful who's giving you the advice, okay?
All right, were there more questions in the house? Okay, Hat?
A question for anyone. What kind of techniques would you use to invoke a feeling of fear or dread in a reader?
What kind of techniques would you use to invoke a feeling of fear or dread in the reader is the question, and I open it up to the whole table.
Sentence fragments.
Yes.
Yeah, they're so good. I mean, and Stephen King uses like things in parentheses when he's actually channeling two different voices simultaneously. I open the door. And I find but even your eye energy going into like a part of a line and instead of having a big wall of text, like the way your eye tracks across the page, especially for writing for kids who can't read a big chunk of text, like thinking things out in thought sometimes instead of measured sentences and knowing when to put the measured sentences in. Like horror has such a beauty and a flow to it. Like in horror movies, like the editing is really where a horror movie gets its soul. Of like, this should be a long drawn out piece, this needs to be short. And I find, to really give a sense of, if you read it out loud, what would it sound like? Would it sound long? Would it sound choppy? And I find that's where the music of it comes from.
Yeah, I think it's all in pacing. I mean, I really think that pacing is such a, and I'm coming from a different, perspective than everybody else. And what Jeff said is absolutely true. And if you read really effective horror fiction, you're going to notice just the flow. Visually, if you just you're not even reading, you just look at it, and you'll see that the writer is using paragraph length, but the chapter breaks too. Chapter breaks are very important. Watch where that is, and just think of it in terms of just the pacing and how you can control that with just sentence structure and length and paragraphs.
Mine's always been to think about the things that make me feel fear and make me feel dread, and then translate those things into the story. Because chances are, if they freak me out and I translate them into the story, they'll freak the reader out.
Yeah.
Or they'll freak out at least some of the readers, because, you know, I mean, the human experience is a shared experience. I have this scene where in one of my books, where I have this girl, and she comes to, and she feels these things crawling on her neck, and she later finds out they're maggots, but she spends part of this chapter just feeling them and trying to figure out what's happening. And I can't tell you how many readers have, this is on my online serial, of like, said, I had to put this down. And you know, it's a common human aversion to maggots, and then just basically, because I was writing in the first person, putting your reader right in there, feeling them in the first person character's voice, and it's super effective. And why is it super effective? Because it's something that a lot of people are completely icked out at.
Yep, I would have to totally agree that if it doesn't scare you, it's not going to scare anyone else. And your pacing thing, what everyone said, just put that on a nice little ball of wax there. But yeah, it's like horror and sex are very similar, which is probably why I write erotic horror. If you're not turned on writing your erotica, no one else will be. If you're not scared writing your own horror, no one else will be.
Okay, there's another question back there. Yeah.
Yes, for everybody there, for an author to be successful, what do you believe their number one trait should be? Their number one habit?
Good writing.
Persistence. Persistence. Because you're going to get rejected over and over and over and over and over again, and you've got to have that thick skin and that persistence to say, I don't care how many times a story gets rejected, eventually I'm going to find the market for this story. Because I looked at my spreadsheet recently, you said you don't sell a lot of short stories. I write a lot of short stories, and I think I'm up to about 570 rejections now, and my sales number is probably in the low 20s or high 20s, low 30s. So, you know, look at that ratio, it's about less than 10%, right? So be persistent and just tell yourself that sooner or later this is going to sell. Just keep trying.
Well, persistence and, again, an openness to realize that your first draft sucks. Okay? Your first draft, no matter who you are, sucks. Hemingway said, good writing is rewriting. I happen to agree with that 100%.
I'm going to say mine because it piggybacks off you. I think the number one trait a writer needs to have is they need to have a lifelong commitment to learning the craft. So even, you know, and that's sort of the thing. It's like every novel you write, every story you write, you're going to become a better writer. And if you don't have a commitment to continually becoming a better writer, then I think, you know, that's probably, because that comes part and parcel with sending things out and getting rejections. You should always be seeking improvement, because writing is a craft, just like woodworking is a craft, and crafts take dozens upon dozens of years to learn and master, if you ever master them.
To that I would add, I agree with absolutely everything everyone has said. But there can be something incredibly liberating in writing a crappy first draft, because if you can fix it, you can get the story, you're like, oh my god, I have this awesome idea for a story, and this, or I have the scene, and this is going to happen, and you're just, this is very fresh in my mind, because this happened to me a couple of days ago, I'm like, right, no way, I'm like, oh my god, this scene, wow, that sentence was terrible, let's just keep going, we can fix it later, and it's incredibly liberating, because you know that it's terrible, you know, I'm just like, oh, forget that show, don't tell thing. I'm just going to tell everyone what's going on. And I'm just like, you know what? I think of that as a note to myself, to like, this is what's actually happening. But it's very, very liberating to just say, you know what? This is going to take time. It's going to take effort. I'm just going to get it out there this time, and I'll fix it later. And that's part of what Monica's saying about learning the craft. You're like, I'm just going to say this.
So you really shouldn't be too worried about editing during your first draft. Otherwise, you're going to do what I spent in my 20s doing, which was writing 5 chapters of a novel and then rewriting those 5 chapters ad nauseum and never writing the other 20 chapters of the novel. Yeah. That was one of the things I had to unlearn in my 30s, which was, for the love of God, start writing a first draft. Don't even look back until you get to the end, and then figure it out later.
Yeah, that's something I guess we all should have talked about in the first question, because I was the same. I'd always like every sentence had to be perfect, but yeah, now it's like, no, you just like use that data to plow through and get that thing done, man, and then you can go back and play.
it's also, a lot of people will write long and edit short. I know I'm one of those. And I have one particular fantasy story, and when I first wrote it, it was 130,000 words. And whoa, PU. It's now down to 85,000 words. It's actually pretty good.
Yeah.
This is for everyone. Where do you sometimes draw your inspiration from? Is it from real life, or is it just some sort of epiphany that comes to you? Like,
I'd say one of my big inspirations is mythology. I love reading mythology, and you'll stumble across a interesting character in it, like, well, the Nuki Kubai from Japanese mythology. And then you say, okay, this is all written in this sort of Iron Age technology. Move that into today. What are you going to get? So that's one of my big inspirations.
I'd say just the newspaper is probably the greatest source of horror inspiration that there is, unfortunately. Almost everything, all the fiction, all the radio plays that I've written so far have actually been inspired by something usually in my local newspaper. So,
I would say read too. The more you read, the more you're inspired to not only maybe write a book that's the same quality as one of your favorite authors, or write a book that evokes the same emotions as one of your favorite authors, or write a book that explores another way of looking at a topic that one of your favorite authors explored. The more that you read, the more inspired you get to just sort of take that in another direction, in your direction, and write your story.
I started writing YA simply because I wanted to write the stories that I wished existed when I was 15 years old.
Yeah.
That was my inspiration, the stuff that wasn't around when I was 15 that I really wished existed. Now I write it.
And the stuff that I'm putting out is the stuff that didn't exist as well. I mean, Evil Eye, which is down there, is about a kid who scratches his eyeball on a tombstone. His eyeball pops out of his head. It's a disembodied eyeball that's up to no good, and it's cheating on math tests for him. But the inspiration for that actually is very cinematic because, I mean, I'm really, like, I was a film student. I love music. I feel a slight irony that I'm even more greatly inspired by films and music and things that aren't text-based than I probably should be. But I know that in Evil Eye I was trying to write this script in my head for a movie that Brian De Palma would never make, but would have like split screen because your eye could see yourself. So there's so many sequences of the book where he's chasing his eyeball on a bike, and he can see himself seeing himself because he's chasing his own eyeball, but then he has no depth perception because it's not stereoscopic. It's really cinematic, and I thought, well, his eyeball wouldn't actually be able to hear anything, and but it's never going to be a movie, but it can be the book, and I can kind of write it like a script, and that's where I feel like that's where that inspiration came from. But it also comes like, for me, it comes like I was doing YA for a long time, and I realized no one's accepting the YA, but they really like these little chapter books for kids because I work with 8-year-olds all day, and I know what school's like, and I can do it accurately. I can know every time I see a movie or I read a book where they're depicting something happening in school, I'm like the first guy to go, no, that would never happen in school. And like I know the structure of what that looks like, so it comes from a real functional place. And kids go to school, so I write about kids who are in school, and and eyeballs.
This is very loosely connected to that, but like the whole write what you know thing is absolutely true. Like a lot of the novel that I published is based on my experience of growing up in a small village in England, and so there's so much media around this experience. I say it's in the village, and maybe someone gets murdered once in a while, but there's this little old lady who'll sort it out, and so there's lots of tea and all this stuff. And I'm like, wow, it's not like that at all. I kind of want to tell. This sounds kind of terrible because it sounds like, read my book. It is my autobiography, which it isn't at all. But it kind of very much drew on that, like, acknowledge religious can be really, really boring. So throw a monster in to mix things up. So you can kind of play with that whole dynamic of like your own experience. You can draw on that a lot.
Okay, there are a couple more in the middle. Yes, right there. Yeah, you.
This is for Jeff. Writing children, do you feel like it has like limited you creatively? Like, do you feel like just writing books for children limits the way you can express yourself creatively, or that it allows you to?
That's a good question. And here's the little chapter books are specifically written for kids, and the language actually has to be at kid level. I remember they were saying don't have words that are longer than 3 syllables because the kids won't get that. And so, but that puts a creative challenge out to you. How can I do the thing I want to do for that specific audience? I mean, I wrote textbook stuff. I wrote supplemental material for a textbook for the Ontario Social Studies curriculum. But how can I do something fun and meet and be within that box? But I've never felt like with Evil Eye, and I've got one coming out called like Sheldon Unger versus the Dentures of Doom. It's about disembodied teeth, but theme going on here. But I've never felt that I'm writing for kids, even though like it's for me. It's like that would be something that I would be as excited by now as I was when I was 12. So I feel like my guts steer me in that direction, and that's me who's writing it. It's 39-year-old me writing for 12-year-old me. It's the same voice. So yeah, which is a kind of joyful to be able to do. Yeah, and then you get really good art, and it makes it even better. It's like an Iron Maiden cover, but yeah.
Your insanity. There was another question in the middle, a couple rows behind her. Yeah.
Hi. One thing I've noticed, 2 spaces after a period.
One.
It's been one for 11 years since when I started working at this one place.
So this is going to get real nerdy real quick. Do you know about monospace fonts?
No.
Okay, so time was. Sorry, April, you're grinning back there. You know about monospace fonts. Okay, so time was when everything was set out on a typewriter. There would be a kind of equal spacing between each of the letters. So you would put 2 spaces after a period in order to signal that visually make it easier to separate the sentence from the last sentence. But now, of course, most things are created on a word processor. And the fonts are adjusted. They're no longer monospace, so each letter does not have the same amount of space allotted to it. So therefore, you only need 1 space after a period. And this is why if you try to make a table in Word, the numbers don't line up unless you use curly. I told you it was nerdy. Okay,
Part 2, I don't know what else is coming up next that could be fresh. Do you guys have any thoughts about that?
I never know what's going to happen next.
If we knew what was happening next, we'd all be in castles in Spain right now instead of here.
The other thing is that I heard a great response to this question, a very similar question once, and I can't remember who gave it. I'm kicking myself. He said that like a lot of these ideas have been done before, tropes have been done before, but not by you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So make it new, make it different. Tell your version of the story that is out there.
Speak your truth.
Yeah, I would say you'd be much better off, instead of chasing the trends, because you're never going to catch them, to tell the story that you feel the most passionate about. Because that passion is going to come through in that story more than it is if you're just simply writing something about werewolves because you think werewolves are going to be hot in 2 years.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, is write the story you want to tell, because you'll never be able to chase the trend. The trend will be over by the time you finish and publish your book, even if you write it in 2 days and self-publish. It'll never happen. You just got to write what you love, write what you know. And I had another thought. What was the actual original question? How to know?
How to know what's coming next.
I kind of shifted a bit, because originally I was saying...
I know.
Have the freshness of...
Right, the freshness. You're right. That's the word I was triggering on. The other night I went to the Fringe Festival in Toronto, and I saw Romeo and Juliet with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and it was called something like that. And so that was a fresh take on both Romeo and Juliet and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So there's always new, exciting ways to do the same old thing. Because we figure there's, 6 plots in the world? Is that what it is? 6 or 7 plots ever? We all know Romeo and Juliet is one, which is West Side Story, which is all sorts of things. So, so it's as you said, it's your story from your point of view, written how you want to tell it. And that's what makes it new and fresh.
Or write that story that you wished someone would tell that you've never seen told before. That's what I do a lot of time with my work. It's just like, here's a story I want to tell. I haven't seen anybody else tell it. I've read hundreds of books over the course of my life, and I haven't seen it anywhere, so I'm going to tell it.
Yeah.
An interesting resource is on Twitter. There's a hashtag MSWL, and it's a manuscript wish list, and it's mostly agents, sometimes editors, tweeting about what they wish they saw in their slush pile more often. And that's a fantastic resource. And again, it is hard to chase a trend, but it's kind of cool to see what the people who are buying manuscripts aren't getting that they want yet. So MSWL, it's awesome.
That's more important is getting an editor's secret wish list because you got that door cracked open already, right?
Yep. Yep.
All right, we've been given the 5-minute warning, so time to get your last questions in. Okay, in the blue.
Where, you have writers market, right, which comes out every year, but almost all those magazines that are in there, we're not looking for horror, and if you do find a smaller press that does horror, by the time probably you send your story to them, they may not even exist. So where's a good spot to look for to find?
Horror Writers Association!
Yeah, sure.
Horror Writers Association. We have the secret handshake. That's why you joined.
There's Rowland.com, RALEN.com.
There's also something new called Horror Tree.
Yeah, I was about to say.
I just signed up to it. I don't know if it's good or not. I just signed up to it like 2 days ago, but I see that they're collecting calls for submissions.
Horror Tree is I think is one guide, and I've been able to actually sell 2 stories to publications from them. But they will put out who is looking for stuff, and they update like pretty regularly, like almost every
I think they
other
send an
day.
email every week.
Yeah, and you can just Google it and it'll take you there, and it's a pretty good site. Yeah.
And there's Duotrope Digest as well. That's another resource that you can find online.
Okay. There was another one, so one more question.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I've got a question for Unless anyone else who's written for younger readers. What are the restrictions on getting your stories published when you're writing for a younger readership?
Restrictions in terms of...
In terms of content, in terms of what you can
Huh, yeah, that's a good one. So Barfbeard, I had a very interesting... The editor I know at like a bigger publishing house, I told her what it was. She's like, no, it's not happening. Barf is not good. And I had a long conversation with another editor, a publisher actually, who they didn't go for it. He loved it because it's awesome. But and in terms of writing for young kids, so and if you're thinking about, I think the U.S. where I don't have as much of a reach because I don't have an agent right now, but the U.S. is a much bigger market, and I think you can do a lot more there. Here in Canada, especially writing for kids, I mean, we don't have that big mass market. I think they do a lot of books to sell to teacher librarians, and like that's who's buying the kids' books. It's often not the kids; it's the parents and the teacher librarians, and so it's tricky. And with these 2 books, like Evil Eye and Sheldon Unger versus Adventures of Doom, it's a small press and we're fortunate because there's no pub board. There's no people to say no to us. We're just putting it out there. It's liberating. It also means it's harder to crack the market. I think that you can't make it overly violent for kids, depending on how old are they. If they're, I think middle grade and YA stuff.
YA is fairly.
Yeah, I've read some pretty
after
intense stuff. Yeah,
YA is fairly open.
But like if you're capping at age 12, if you're like a middle grade, like 12, 13, it's tricky. But by using horror and by like having the violence monstrous and not necessarily bloodletting, and I can kind of circumvent some of those pitfalls that might be a big warning, because the teacher librarians are the ones who are going to advocate for you, but they can also be your biggest critics because they might say, "Whoa, this is too much for kids," and it's tricky, yeah. Because as a parent who is introducing my son to Star Wars, like there's stuff in Star Wars that we're learning is okay and stuff that's not okay. And it's interesting. Parents are, Jabba the Hutt's way too scary right now for 4-year-olds.
Okay, I want to thank everyone for coming out to Horror Lit 101. If you have questions and you didn't get a chance to have them answered, I encourage you to, if you see our authors around over the weekend, pop up and ask them. I'm sure they'll be happy to talk with you further. Thank you again, and please enjoy the rest of Dark Carnival with the cocktail party tonight.